Welcome to the Parts and Labor Podcast, the podcast that explores the strategies, systems, and stories that drive salon success. I'm Alicia, founder and CEO of Salon Scale.
And I'm Whitney, head of sales here at Salon Scale.
And welcome to the Parts and Labor Podcast. I'll do better this time. Cheers. I would just say, if you're listening to this right now, this is probably the most important episode you're going to listen to.
Okay, so last we left off, I said I had a lot of questions for you. And I think a good place to start, like the most basic question, is what is parts plus labor and why does it work so well with Salon Scale?
Well, I would just say, if you're listening to this right now, this is probably the most important episode you're going to listen to. I think you would say the same. It's our favorite subject, right? Like it's our favorite topic, right? Because it is going to unlock so much for you. So the first step is really understanding what it is. So if you are already a salon and you have like a by menu pricing system, or you're like pricing by minute, or you're doing that and you've done the like back math and you've like assumed cost, you've already separated your parts from labor, technically. But the really true understanding is who is actually paying for those parts. That's really what it is. And that's why we're here to talk about that. Essentially, those parts, they're variable. And in salons today, and the way that trends have changed vastly over the last couple of years, you cannot simply keep it in. You can't keep it in your price point. You can't assume those costs anymore, because assuming is going to leave you like guessing and stressing. And that's just probably not the place you want to be as a salon owner. And it never was fun for me as a salon owner. I hated having my staff meetings where we'd like scrape buckets and talk about like all these things that were like problems that I couldn't solve anymore. You know, it's like last week's waste, last month's lack of profit. You know, it's like, it's gone. So it's now, got to a place where when you truly understand parts and labor, you understand the model of passing that cost on to the customer, the variable rate will always get paid for. And when I started to kind of like break into what that is and really talk to other salon owners about this, and we both talk about this all the time, but I think the big thing is to understand that every customer is different. Every main is not the same. And so when you're servicing the same type of service, like if you're doing a long balayage, well, your hair is going to cost a lot more than mine would cost, right? And so like when you're trying to factor in assuming or averages, they simply just don't cover them. And then they don't cover them at the rate of those supplies increasing with inflation and everything else going on. And so when you really understand the two parts of this, which is like there's parts, which is the things that are variable, the things that cost you to do your business. And then there's the labor, which is your time and really like your worth, and when you look at your stylists, whether they're level 1s or level 5s, they have a different price point at that point. But when you can separate those two things, you finally can control the cash flow in your business, and you're pricing yourself for the maximum profitability you can have in your business. So our kind of spin on the method is passing the parts, the cost it did in every session onto the customer versus keeping it in and hoping it was covered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. When you created Salon Scale, did you know that this was the problem? Did you know that this is how you were going to use it in your business?
Well, I think the funny thing about this is like I learned it as I built Salon Scale. I think that that's also a reason why a lot of people come to Salon Scale. They're like, I need to track my waste, my costs, right? Like they come that way because that's how I was too. Mm-hmm. But then you realize that for every problem and you find a solution, there's more problems. So that's what happened. So I knew I needed to track costs and I thought it was waste. So then I built this app. And then when I started calculating what those costs were, I realized, holy shit, like this is I have a pricing problem. I have a foundational problem in my business that I'm not pricing our services and properly to cover these costs based off every single staff, based off every single customer. There's too many variables. And so it took me a few months of integrating it into the teams, getting their buy-in. Like that takes a while because, it's hitting wallets, right? And when you're hitting that, it takes a lot of confidence before you're selling that next step. So we really, once we put it into the business and I started to see what that cost was, I saw instantly that it was like around $4,100 a month just of cost. And so I had an option. And like, that's that beginning stage of, do I want to just keep tracking it to my average or tracking it to my service charge and like hoping I'm covering it? Or do I want to just be like, you know what, let's just separate this. And then I never have to have the conversation ever again. I never have to negotiate what it costs me to run the business. And the only thing I negotiate with my staff would be their time, their labor. So it just takes all that equation out of it. But it happened by design. And then through the years, we started to really narrow it down of the simplest way to implement it or talk to it with your teams and do all that stuff. Like that just kind of took a little bit. But I think the best part is actually just seeing the cost. Once you see that cost, you now realize that your method probably is not covering these costs.
And that's wild to hear you say because, so like I said in the first episode, like you were my like rich friend. Like Capelli it's a high-end salon. It's absolutely beautiful. You did such a good job with it. And you're stylist. I was never loyal to one stylist. I was loyal to the salon because I knew everybody did such a good job. Like you were so good at making sure everybody was trained and providing education. So your prices reflected that. So having like a high-end luxury salon, and you said you were taking a service charge, it's crazy to hear like that still wasn't covering it. That traditional method still wasn't accounting for these costs.
No, and I think it's because there's compounding effects that we don't think about, right? It's like, well, we already charge enough, or I have a $25, like baked in fee to go for every single balayage. So like that's more than enough from product. They're only really using $15. It should be covering it. So no, because you're not factoring in the compound effect. Number one, like replenishing the cost is not factored in. So yes, they might have used $15 or you might have used $15, but you need $15 to replace that product. This is like an ever evolving back bar. It's not like you're going to use a tube of color and never use it again. It's going to need to replenish itself. And it's the same thing when you think of retail. You would never buy a product at wholesale and then charge the customer at a wholesale. Or even mark it up only 50 points. Like if you literally do that, you'll never build enough cash flow and never make any money off of it. So what's the point of having it? And so I think that we got like trapped into this thing, which was, well, this is a professional good and I can't charge for professional goods. So I've had a lot of salons like fight me on like that's why we can't do this because you can't charge your customers for this. And it's like, you should never feel bad to make money off every aspect of your salon. You are a razor thin marginal business. You cannot afford to have that kind of conversation. Like you cannot have that mindset because you're operating off like 8 to maybe 15% if you're lucky. That's not enough margin to actually be in that kind of mindset. What you need to know is how do I maximize it? How do I ensure I'm always going to hit 10 to 15%? Because it only takes 1 week or one bad month and you made nothing. And that's usually what's happening. Now, the second compound thing is not only are you replenishing, but you're paying commission. So for every single gram or ounce that you didn't capture, you're paying commission on it. So that's where you see this huge leak in the business. And that's the cash flow loss that we see in salons. And it's simply fixed by just simply separating your parts from labor. You just charge your customer for what you used. The variable rate goes to the consumer. The labor that is commissionable is on a fixed amount. You know exactly what they did, their level, and that is, setting yourself up for maximizing your chances of making the true profit margin you deserve as a business owner.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Just starting out thinking your biggest issue was waste. That's, like you said, where a lot of salon owners come in starting to explore salon scale. Like, we need to manage the waste. And then also, like you said, that they're paying commission on the waste. Every dollar that's gram or ounce that isn't captured, and you're paying commission on it. That's what eats up all the profit in the salon, is what we're finding. And so it's interesting to hear, like, that's where you started too. You didn't just build salon scale to charge parts plus labor. It kind of happened organically.
Well, I think, at the end of the day, majority of salons are built by stylists. It's very rare that someone went to business school and was like, I'm going to build a salon. Like, that's not going to happen. So you got creative artists that build a brand for themselves or build their chair, and then they go out on their own and then they build a business. So yeah, when it comes to business fundamentals, it's not our best subject. It's not the thing that we were ever trained on, but the industry thrives on us not knowing that. So I wanted to change that. and I wanted to change it in the most simplest way of understanding your financials so that you don't get played by the way the market works for you right now.
Yeah.
And that's just really making sure that you're capturing this stuff. Because if you're not, if you think about it, this is an accounting error. And when you're not separating these things and you're not doing these properly, there's so much more issues that happen down the line. And, this is not to like put terror in a salon owner, but the reality is that, you're inflating income, right? You're like saying, if you, at the end of the month, your salon did $10,000, and you had some type of service charge, or you had nothing, you paid 50% commission. So you're paying $5,000 out and your salon's saying it made 5,000. Well, like what was the cost to do that?
Mm-hmm.
What was the cost of goods to do that? And did you claim that, or did you just have an expense of like, did you just have like an order that you're claiming at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, right? So what happens is we are kind of projecting like the business is bringing more revenue. Whereas if you really understand that cost of goods, you can subtract that really by your revenue and have a true gross profit margin. Whereas like, you could capture that a little bit easier by using a digital solution.
Yeah.
And like now's the time. Like I always said non-negotiable. I said this before, but I think the big thing is like you need technology to help amplify this. This is like, it's crazy. Like a tube of color now is like $10 a tube. So like if you're just like, free pouring all this product, you're looking at thousands of dollars of like uncategorized products that are like going to cost you thousands of dollars in taxation and recording it in properly. So it's important to really separate those things properly.
Yeah.
And that will help you in many different ways.
Yeah. And as far as I want to touch on, so you came out with Salon Scale. Did you start having your team like use the app before you were even switching to parts plus labor? Like, did you have them just like know the costs, or did you introduce it to your team and say like, this is the way we're charging now? And what did they say?
Yep. So 30 days. Like they used the app for the first time. And that first month where I saw it was $4,100 worth of lost revenue, like that I could have been charging out for that. The next month I said, yeah, now we're just going to pass that cost on to the consumer.
Were they were fine?
Well, no, I think there's a lot of questions, but I think at that time it was like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to work with you. Like, what are your concerns? Tell me what your fears are. What holds you back? Like what are you feeling right now? Because I leaned into conflict. Like I need this for the business. This is why, and I understand you have problems too. So let's sit down and have a conversation about it. Because at the end of the day, I value you. I value what you bring to the business, and like that's the labor part that we're negotiating on. But when it comes to my business and the cost of goods and the cost to keep the lights on in this place, that's not on the table. So this needs to be covered. And I'm sure you don't want me to take it from you. So we need to pass it on to someone. Because my business can't take it anymore. Yeah. And like that was like, I just had that conversation. So it's like, I'm not trying to offend you. I'm not trying to offend your clients. I'm not trying to create any chaos here. I'm simply just trying to cover the cost of my business. So how do you see us working this way? And, a lot of the times, my more senior staff would have like a little bit more questions on it. Like they would have a little bit more, like they've built this clientele and there's a lot more ownership of that client. And so that, I remember having more like one-on-ones with those. So I had a like team meeting, said this is what's going to happen, got all their feedback, and then basically went to those that had a little bit more pushback and just like really narrowed it down to being like, well, if you're not ready to start, next week, what about in 2 weeks? What about this date? What if we work towards this? Right. And like, you can kind of work your way through it. But yeah, within the next month, we had already started passing on the costs. I think I had 2 senior staff that like were a little delayed by a few weeks, but even capturing 80% of my revenue back was still a lot better than me losing what I had. And it only took me a short quarter to be able to get up and running. And I think we went on to like making like another $50,000 that year, just by the switch.
And were your clients, like, did you tell them beforehand? Were you just like, we're doing a price increase? Like, did you say, how much verbiage did you give them and how much, I guess, notice? Because I think it's something that a lot of salon owners, they're curious about. It all sounds good, but they lose a lot of sleep over like what the client's going to say or fear of losing clients, which is valid. So what did you tell your clients? Like, how'd they react?
Well, I think the first thing is like, as a business owner, especially a salon owner, it's like, I think a lot of times you have like you make up more problems than there really is. Like you build the anxiety, like there's gonna be this pushback, that pushback, and like it stops you from actually doing the thing that you need to do, right? And so it's like for this to be true, for me to be able to do this, like what do I need to know? So like, do I need one or two customers to test it out on one or two and see how their reactions were to then sell it to the rest of them? Like you got to start asking yourself, like, this is what you need to do for your business. So like, what is the best way to do it? Now, when I, we just full sent it into the business and we just tested it out. We said like, well, let's see what happens in the first couple of weeks of what customers are saying. We can always pull back. Like we can always figure that out later. But what we found was there was actually so much more, clarity in how we were charging, and there was more transparency, really, honestly. And I think that the customers actually had more confidence in why we were charging what we were doing. And then we started to build the beginning stages of the script that we really give to customers, which is just like, we're not going to charge you anymore. We're only going to charge you for the exact amount of product used today. Yep. And the best part about it is we have an electric, a digital electric. We have a digital record management that will keep track of your favorite formulas. Yeah. And that way, every time you come back, we'll always know and we'll always have that here for you at the business, right? Like it creates more loyalty. Because I think I remember this one fact was like, if you keep records of people's color, they're 30% more likely to come back to you. 30%. So, just by saying that, it created a lot more clarity to the customer that, they will always be able to get that favorite toner, or get that favorite service that they had. And nowadays, when people are going longer between services, like they really want you to make sure that you're on top of those things too. So it kind of like works all together that way as well.
And some of the last thing I want to touch on regarding, clients, I know that the salon charges hourly now, plus product. Did you always charge that way? Did you switch that way to charging parts plus labor? We have salons that do both. Is one kind of better than the other? Did you switch when you started using Salon Skill, or how'd that come about? Or was it always that way and I was just out to lunch and just put my credit card down every time I came in?
No, I think... First of all, I think like we're going to have to get into like so much more on like pricing models, and we'll get to that in other episodes. But I think the big thing for me on this is that like I had a by menu service. So it was like starts at $100 for this service type, starts at that. But I knew right away, like this was not adding up, right? Like if I had a full day of haircuts booked, and at that time I was doing like hour-long haircuts, I was charging $100 for a haircut. But like, what was the cost to do a haircut? There wasn't color on that. So it's like making way more money if I had a day of haircuts. But did that fuel me? No, I loved color. So it's like I started to really cohort out really like what businesses, like what services take X amount of time. And then what does the average cost to do those services? And that's when you realize right away that like you can't just a la carte it. You can't just like bundle it. You can't just like without really truly understanding that one variable, that really, what does it cost me to do that service? Because that would be a swing of like making an additional 10 or 20% or losing it altogether because you didn't factor that in. Right. So when I started to go through, and like I kind of said earlier, which was like every problem gives you a solution, and then like you get more problems from those solutions. That's kind of what happened through the whole progression of Salon Scale. Is like, I now knew the costs. I now was passing on to customer. And then now face it was like, oh my God, I have a pricing problem. So like, it was like a fundamental, like that's the steps. And like, that's the steps our customers face every day. Like, that's what you will face. You're like, I want to track. Then you realize that you're like having implementation. Then you like figure out that like you have a pricing issue. And that pricing is just really understanding, really time and parts. And when we look at our menus today, there's a difference in the way that a consumer reads a menu to the way that we price a menu. So I think switching for us to hourly it made the most sense. And we didn't change our menu. Like the only thing that changed was like we didn't have like level 1s are this and level 2s are this. We were like, okay, these services, they take an hour. These services take 2 hours on average. And then we basically broke down what each stylist hourly rate was. And then it made everything so much easier. Like at the end of the year, when I do annual reports or annual performance reviews, it's so much easier to do an hourly increase versus, a 10% lift across all services or this or that. So you're going to lift up haircuts, but they didn't perform well in haircuts, or they didn't do more haircuts. Like, why would we lift all of the services? Like, why would you not target the over? Like, it just kind of was a backwards kind of way of doing it. And really, it's not about really what you do. Like, it's not really about, whether it's a haircut or this, it's your time. Like, as a stylist, that's what you should be valued at. And that's what you should value your stylist at. Everything else, whether it's on the menu, it's a way to clearly communicate to the customer what they're getting. I'm getting a haircut. I'm getting this. And then essentially, the other note I would just say on this, which is important to know, is like, when you go to a restaurant or whether you go to a dental clinic, like, you would never talk in the language that happens in the back. So why are we doing that in salons? It's like, you would never go to a restaurant. You look at a menu, you see the menu. But what you don't see in the back is you don't see their cost breakdowns. You don't see how they've packaged everything out and made sure that like every plate is designed for profitability. Like, you don't see that conversation. And yet we are just letting everyone be the chefs and bakers and just whatever. Like, you want a side of this, you want a side of that. Like, hopefully you charged a Rapunzel, or hopefully you charge extra. It's like, you're giving too much like leeway to that strategy. So by saying, I'm going to negotiate with you as my stylist, your time and your worth, and we're going to make a commission off that under my brand, under my umbrella. But the parts on this side, that's not there.
The cough that will not go. Okay, I think that that's a good place to stop for today, because I know on our next episode, we're going to dive a bit further into like the actual pricing and like really deep dive into what it looks like to implement parts plus labor into the salon. So that's a good spot to end it. If you're liking this content so far, make sure you hit subscribe and stay tuned for next week's episode where, like I said, we will dive further into implementing parts plus labor and the real pricing model behind that.